A broken saddle brings unexpected love. Rancher meets Apache woman, 1800s Western. Ethan McCall rode steadily across the rugged land, his horse's hooves crunching against the rocky soil. He had been traveling for hours, guiding his small herd toward a stretch of land he had heard was rich and fertile. This was a chance, he thought, a chance to expand his modest cattle ranch and provide a better future for himself and his family. But the journey was not easy. The terrain was unforgiving, scattered with jagged rocks, dry creek beds, and steep hills that tested both horse and rider. Ethan's hands were calloused from years of handling ropes, saddles, and cattle. His face was sun-weathered, and his eyes carried the quiet determination of a man who had learned early in life that hard work was the only path to success. Despite his experience, he felt a growing unease that day, a sense that something unexpected might occur. He tightened his grip on the reins, scanning the horizon as the wind stirred loose dust around him. The plains stretched endlessly, the sky a brilliant canvas of orange and pink. It was beautiful, but unforgiving, and Ethan knew that one wrong move could change everything. As he guided his horse along a rocky trail, he felt the familiar comfort of the saddle beneath him. But suddenly, a loud snap broke the rhythm of his ride. The saddle shifted violently, throwing Ethan slightly forward. He tried to steady himself, but a moment later, the leather strap that held the saddle together tore completely. His horse stumbled slightly, throwing Ethan against its neck. He caught himself just in time, gripping the reins tightly, but his heart raced with sudden panic. Without a saddle, riding was dangerous. The rocky trail could easily cause a fall, and there was no one around for miles who could offer help. Ethan slid from the horse, dust rising around his boots. He examined the broken leather strap, shaking his head in frustration. "Just my luck," he muttered under his breath. He had known the saddle was old, but it had never failed him like this before. Now, stranded in the middle of nowhere, he had no choice but to try to fix it, or risk traveling on foot for miles with his herd. He tied his horse to a nearby tree and examined his small repair kit. There were patches of leather, some rope, and a few metal buckles. It might work for a temporary fix, but it would not hold for long, and the sun was dipping lower, threatening to leave him in the growing shadows of evening. He knelt on the ground, working to repair the strap. The process was slow, and every snap of a twig or rustle of wind made him tense. The plains were not empty, predators lurked, and a lone traveler like him could be vulnerable. He paused to wipe the sweat from his brow and looked around. The land seemed calm now, bathed in warm sunlight, but Ethan knew better. Nature could shift in an instant, from peaceful to dangerous. Just as he was securing the patch, he noticed movement at the edge of the tree line. At first he thought it was another animal, perhaps a deer or a coyote, but then he saw the figure of a woman emerge from the shadows. She moved with quiet grace, her steps careful and deliberate. Her dark hair was pulled back and her eyes held a sharp, watchful expression. She was unlike anyone Ethan had seen on the plains, strong, confident, yet cautious. Something about her presence made him pause. He had grown up among settlers and ranchers, but he had heard stories about the Apache who roamed these lands. Though he had never met one face to face, the tales spoke of skill, courage, and fierce independence. The woman stopped a few paces away, watching him intently. Ethan's heart pounded, not with fear but with cautious curiosity. He straightened slowly, raising a hand in greeting. "Evening," he called out, his voice steady despite the sudden nervousness. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing him, but she did not retreat. Instead, she tilted her head, as if deciding whether he was a threat. She spoke in a language Ethan did not understand, soft but firm. He shook his head, trying to signal that he didn't comprehend. She seemed to understand because she switched to broken English, the words clipped but clear. "Saddle broken?" she asked. Ethan nodded, motioning to the torn leather. She studied the strap for a moment, her gaze sharp and precise, as if weighing the possibility of helping him. Then, with a subtle nod, she stepped closer. Ethan watched as she knelt beside him, pulling a small bundle from her satchel. Inside were strips of leather, some cord, and a few tools that looked as worn as his own repair kit. She handed him a strip, demonstrating a quick knot that was unfamiliar to him. Her hands moved with practiced skill, and Ethan realized she had done this many times before. Her eyes met his, and he felt a mix of admiration and humility. Here was someone who understood the land in ways he could only hope to learn. They worked together in silence, the occasional instruction exchanged through gestures and simple words. Ethan followed her lead, mimicking the knots and tucks she showed him. Slowly, carefully, the saddle began to take shape again. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold, and the temperature started to drop. Yet Ethan did not feel the cold. There was something in this shared task, this quiet cooperation, that brought a strange comfort to him. Finally, after what felt like hours, the saddle was secure enough to ride. Ethan tested it carefully, shifting his weight to make sure it held. It was not perfect, but it would carry him and his horse safely through the remaining distance to his next stop. He looked up at the woman, wanting to thank her properly, but words felt insufficient. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable, yet there was a spark of recognition, an unspoken understanding that this encounter was rare and meaningful. Ethan mounted his horse slowly, feeling the weight of the day and the strangeness of the moment. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. The woman smiled faintly, a gesture that was both shy and knowing. "Help," she replied simply. Her voice was calm, steady, and filled with an authority that made Ethan respect her instantly. As he rode a few steps forward, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and fascination. He had come to these plains seeking opportunity, adventure, and perhaps a little solitude. But what he had found was something far more unexpected, a glimpse into a life completely different from his own, yet connected to his in the most surprising way. The plains stretched out endlessly before him, and he knew that this journey was only beginning. The broken saddle had brought him here, to this moment, and to this woman who had appeared like a force of nature itself. As the first stars began to pierce the evening sky, Ethan could not have guessed that this simple act of repair would mark the start of a story far greater than he had ever imagined. He guided his horse alongside the woman for a few more steps, both of them silent now, each lost in their own thoughts. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of adventure, danger, and possibility. For Ethan McCall, the plains had always been a place of work and hardship, but now they felt like the beginning of something new, something that might change the course of his life forever. As night fell, Ethan finally thanked her again, bowing slightly from the saddle. The woman nodded once more, then disappeared quietly into the shadows of the trees, leaving Ethan with a mixture of wonder, gratitude, and an unshakable curiosity about the mysterious Apache woman who had appeared when he needed help the most. And so, under the vast expanse of the Arizona sky, Ethan rode on, his broken saddle mended, his journey continuing, and his heart quietly intrigued by the unexpected encounter that had turned an ordinary day into the start of an extraordinary story. Ethan rode slowly through the fading light, keeping his eyes on the narrow trail and his thoughts on the mysterious woman who had helped him. The plains were quiet now, the only sounds the gentle clopping of his horse's hooves and the whispering wind through the tall grasses. Despite the broken saddle being repaired, a part of him wished he could have learned more from her, perhaps even spoken to her properly. But the world he lived in was different from hers, and he knew the divide between their lives was as wide as the plains themselves. As he moved cautiously, he noticed the outline of a small camp tucked behind a cluster of trees not far from the trail. Smoke curled lazily into the twilight sky, carrying the scent of burning wood and herbs. The woman had led him here, and though Ethan did not understand the customs of her people, he could sense safety in this hidden place. He approached slowly, careful not to startle anyone, and the woman, Aeon, as he had learned from her gestures, watched him with calm eyes. Aeon motioned for him to dismount, guiding him toward a flat spot near the fire. The warmth of the flames was inviting, and Ethan's hands shook slightly as he ran them over his aching muscles. She handed him a small bundle of dried meat and corn, pointing to it and then to him, suggesting he eat. Ethan nodded, grateful, and took the food. The taste was simple but nourishing, and he realized that survival in these lands required both knowledge and respect for nature. He had spent most of his life tending cattle and working the soil, but Aeon's world was different. It was in harmony with the land rather than conquering it. As he ate, Ethan noticed how she moved around the camp with quiet confidence. She checked the small fire, arranged stones into a circle, and seemed to know instinctively where everything should be. He admired her skill, the way she could manage all of this with calm and precision. She didn't speak much, but her actions spoke volumes. It was clear she had spent her life learning the land, understanding its rhythms, and surviving through knowledge and patience. Ethan realized he had much to learn, not just about survival, but about respect, patience, and the quiet strength that came from living closely with nature. After he had eaten, Aeon motioned for him to follow her. She pointed to a small stream nearby, the water sparkling faintly in the last rays of the sun. Ethan understood. She wanted him to wash and refresh himself. He stepped into the cool water, letting the river soothe his aching muscles. The feeling was invigorating, and he realized how sore he had become after days of riding and repairing his saddle. Aeon remained nearby, not speaking, simply watching him with a steady, unjudging gaze. There was a subtle understanding between them now, a silent communication born of necessity and trust. Once he was done, she led him to a small area where she had placed herbs and leaves carefully in rows. She picked up a sprig, crushed it in her hands, and rubbed it on his arms. The scent was sharp but pleasant, and Ethan felt the tension in his muscles ease. He marveled at how she seemed to know exactly what his body needed. He had grown up helping on a ranch, but no one had ever taught him the secrets of the land in this way. "You heal," he said, his words clumsy but filled with wonder. She smiled faintly, nodding. It was not just healing, he realized, but teaching. She was showing him the connection between people and the earth. Over the next few days, Ethan remained near the camp, repairing the saddle properly and tending to his horse, but also learning from Aeon. She taught him which plants could be used for healing, which roots could soothe pain, and which leaves were poisonous. Each lesson was simple, practical, and carried a sense of respect for life. Ethan watched her carefully, mimicking her actions and listening to her instructions. He could see the wisdom in her movements, the years of experience that made her every gesture efficient and purposeful. Aeon, in turn, began to observe Ethan. She noticed his patience, his respect for animals, and the way he approached work with quiet determination. She saw that he was not like the settlers who often ignored the land, taking what they wanted without understanding its ways. Ethan's willingness to learn, to listen, and to follow her guidance surprised her. Slowly, the initial caution and distance between them began to melt. They were from different worlds, yes, but their shared respect for the land and for hard work created a bond neither expected. One afternoon, while gathering water from the stream, Ethan slipped slightly on a mossy rock. Aeon's hand shot out instinctively, catching him before he could fall. He looked into her eyes, and for a moment there was something unspoken between them, a quiet acknowledgement of trust. "Thank you," he said softly. She nodded, brushing the dirt from her hands, and for a second she allowed herself a small smile. These moments were fleeting but meaningful, the beginnings of a connection that went beyond words or culture. Ethan found himself talking more, sharing stories of his life on the ranch, describing the vast fields of cattle, the long days in the sun, and the struggles of managing a home far from neighbors. He spoke with a mix of pride and humility, and he noticed that Aeon listened with genuine interest. She asked questions, not many, but enough to show that she cared about his world, and he, in turn, asked about hers. Though language was sometimes a barrier, gestures, expressions, and the occasional word bridged the gap. As the days passed, their cooperation grew into routine. Aeon taught Ethan to read the trails, to recognize the tracks of animals, and to understand the signs of changing weather. She showed him how to move quietly, how to avoid danger, and how to respect the rhythms of nature rather than trying to control them. Ethan absorbed every lesson with humility and awe. He realized that life in the settlement had taught him many things, but Aeon's knowledge was something entirely different, a wisdom born from years of living in harmony with the wild. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Ethan and Aeon sat near the fire together. He noticed how the light played across her face, highlighting the strength in her features and the gentleness in her eyes. There was a quiet companionship between them now, built not on words alone but on shared experiences, small acts of trust, and the understanding that each had faced hardships the other could only imagine. Ethan realized he felt something he had not expected, a deep respect, admiration, and perhaps the beginning of something more. Aeon, too, felt the change. She had been cautious at first, wary of strangers and the intentions of settlers, but Ethan's honesty and humility had earned her trust. She saw in him a man who could survive the land not just through skill, but through integrity and respect. It was rare, she knew, to find such qualities, and she felt a quiet connection growing, something neither could ignore, though neither spoke it aloud. The days continued, filled with work and learning. Ethan helped gather firewood, mend the broken tools, and care for the small garden of herbs Aeon maintained. In return, she guided him in ways that made his life easier and safer, showing him shortcuts, sharing insights about the land, and occasionally teaching him the quiet art of patience. Each day brought small victories and quiet joys, a successful repair, a safe crossing of the stream, the discovery of a new plant. These moments, simple as they were, created a rhythm that both found comforting. By the end of the week, Ethan's saddle was fully repaired, stronger than it had been before. His horse was rested and ready, and the trail to the next settlement was clear. But when he looked at Aeon, he realized he did not want to leave so soon. There was a bond that had formed, fragile yet undeniable, and he felt a pull in his chest that he could not name. He had come to these plains seeking opportunity and a new beginning for his ranch, but he had found something far more profound, a glimpse into a life filled with wisdom, strength, and quiet beauty. Aeon noticed his hesitation, and for a moment their eyes met with understanding. Words were unnecessary. She had taught him more than survival. She had shown him trust, patience, and the value of seeing the world through another's eyes. Ethan knew that when he left, he would carry not just the lessons of the land, but the memory of this remarkable woman who had appeared when he needed help most. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fading light, Ethan and Aeon sat quietly by the fire one last time that evening. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of sage and earth. Ethan realized that this encounter, brief as it might seem in the vastness of the plains, had changed him in ways he could not yet fully understand. He had arrived seeking opportunity, but he had discovered respect, trust, and a connection that could shape his life forever. And so, under the blanket of stars, Ethan McCall prepared for the journey ahead. The land stretched endlessly before him, wild and unpredictable, but he now knew he would face it with newfound understanding and gratitude. Aeon had taught him lessons that no book or mentor ever could, and though words could not capture the depth of what he felt, he knew the plains had given him a gift far greater than he had expected, a companion, a teacher, and perhaps, in time, something even closer to the heart. The next morning, the plain stretched before Ethan like an endless sea of golden grass. The sunlight shimmered across the rolling hills, making the world seem alive and full of promise. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and earth. Ethan's horse shifted under him as he adjusted the newly repaired saddle, testing its strength. It held perfectly, a testament to both his efforts and Aeon's guidance. But for Ethan, the work was no longer the only reason he lingered. The days spent with Aeon had awakened something within him, a curiosity, admiration, and a growing respect that he could not easily put into words. Aeon was already awake, tending a small fire beside her camp. She moved with her usual quiet confidence, collecting fresh water from the nearby stream and arranging her supplies neatly. Ethan watched her for a moment, amazed at how effortlessly she managed everything. Even the smallest gestures, how she handled the herbs, how she arranged stones around the fire, how she moved with care, revealed a depth of knowledge and skill he had never encountered before. He realized that she had lived all her life in harmony with the land, and that every action she took was guided by understanding, experience, and respect. "You're up early," Ethan said, his voice breaking the silence. Aeon looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. She gave a small nod, a gesture that spoke more than words could. In response, he climbed down from his horse and approached the fire. The morning air was cool, carrying a faint mist from the stream, and Ethan felt the sharp bite of the early hour. He had grown accustomed to long days on the ranch, but the desert morning had a different kind of intensity, one that demanded attention, awareness, and patience. After a brief breakfast of dried meat and bread, Aeon motioned for Ethan to follow her. She led him to a nearby clearing, where the ground was soft and dotted with plants of various shapes and colors. Here, she began to teach him the ways of the land, lessons that went far beyond ranching or survival. She showed him how to identify plants by touch and smell, how to distinguish those that were safe to eat or use for healing from those that could harm. She demonstrated the proper way to harvest leaves and roots without damaging the plant, a skill that required both care and knowledge. Ethan tried to follow her instructions carefully, fumbling at first, but slowly improving under her watchful eye. As the morning passed, Aeon taught him how to read the trails left by animals. She showed him paw prints and hoof marks, teaching him to distinguish between predators and prey, young and old, weak and strong. "See here," she said, pointing to a small set of tracks near the edge of the clearing. "These are fresh. A coyote passed by last night." Ethan leaned closer, studying the delicate impressions in the soft earth. He realized that Aeon's knowledge went beyond survival. It was a deep understanding of the rhythms of the land, of life itself. Every mark, every sound, every scent told a story if one only knew how to listen. By midday, the sun hung high in the sky, burning bright and hot. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow and took a moment to drink from his canteen. His muscles ached from the early morning work, yet he felt invigorated. There was a thrill in learning these new skills, in discovering a way of life that was different from his own, yet connected in ways he could not have imagined. Aeon, noticing his weariness, handed him a small bundle of leaves and showed him how to crush them to soothe sore muscles. The scent was strong but comforting, and Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders ease. As they continued their lessons, Ethan began to share more about his life on the ranch. He spoke of long days tending cattle, of fixing fences under the scorching sun, and of the quiet satisfaction that came from a day's honest work. He told her about the challenges he faced, droughts, cattle sickness, and the constant struggle to maintain his land. Aeon listened intently, her expression thoughtful. Though she did not speak much, her attentive gaze and occasional nods showed that she understood, that she respected his world as he respected hers. Over the next several days, Ethan and Aeon worked side by side, building a rhythm that was both practical and comforting. Ethan learned how to move quietly through the brush, how to avoid startling animals, and how to prepare simple meals using only what the land provided. Aeon, in turn, observed him closely, noticing his patience, diligence, and determination. She saw that he was not just a man who worked with strength, but one who approached life with care and thoughtfulness, a quality rare in the world she had seen. One afternoon, while tracking a herd of deer, Ethan slipped on a loose rock and stumbled. Aeon's hand shot out instinctively, steadying him before he could fall. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. The air between them seemed charged with something unspoken, a shared understanding that went beyond survival or cooperation. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest he had not expected, a quiet admiration for this woman who had become both his guide and his equal. Aeon, too, felt the shift, recognizing a bond that was growing stronger with each passing day. As they rested by the stream, Ethan tried to explain something about his life, something that connected him to the land in ways Aeon might understand. "On the ranch, we work hard every day," he said slowly. "But it's not just work, it's respect. Respect for the land, for the animals, for the life we build. I think you understand that better than anyone I've ever met." Aeon regarded him quietly, then gave a small nod. Her eyes softened slightly, and Ethan sensed that she understood, even if the words were not the same in her language. The days continued with lessons and shared tasks, but slowly, something deeper began to emerge. Ethan noticed how Aeon's eyes sparkled when she explained a tracking technique, how her lips curved into a faint smile when she was pleased with his progress. He found himself looking for her approval, feeling a quiet joy when she nodded or offered guidance. Aeon, in turn, began to rely on Ethan's steady presence. She recognized his willingness to learn, his honesty, and his quiet strength. There was a comfort in knowing he could be trusted, that he respected her knowledge and her world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Ethan and Aeon sat together by the fire. The warmth of the flames lit their faces, casting soft shadows. Ethan realized that he no longer thought of this time as temporary. The connection they shared, fragile but undeniable, had become a part of him. He felt admiration, respect, and something more, a sense that their paths had crossed for a reason, that the lessons he learned from Aeon were not just about survival, but about understanding, trust, and perhaps even the beginnings of love. Aeon noticed his gaze, and for a moment their eyes met with mutual understanding. She had been cautious at first, wary of strangers and their intentions, but Ethan's honesty and humility had earned her trust. She recognized in him a man who could survive the land not only through skill but through integrity and respect. Though they had not spoken about it, a quiet bond had formed, one that neither could deny, even if the world beyond the plains remained uncertain. Over the following days, the work continued, but the lessons took on new meaning. Ethan learned not only how to track and survive, but how to move through life with patience, observation, and respect. Aeon's guidance taught him that strength was not always about force, but about understanding, adapting, and valuing the world around you. He realized that his ranching experience, though practical, was limited in comparison to the depth of knowledge Aeon possessed. And yet, he saw how his own skills complemented hers, creating a partnership built on mutual respect and cooperation. One morning, while crossing a narrow ridge, Ethan paused to look at the vast expanse of land before them. The plain stretched endlessly, golden and wild, yet there was beauty in the challenge, in the work, and in the quiet moments shared with Aeon. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for her guidance, for her trust, and for the unexpected bond that had grown between them. He understood that this connection, though new and fragile, was something rare and precious, something worth protecting and nurturing. By the end of the third part of their journey together, Ethan and Aeon had become more than teacher and student, more than guide and traveler. They had become companions, allies, and friends. The initial tension of strangers had given way to understanding, trust, and a subtle admiration that neither could fully explain. And as they prepared to face the challenges ahead, Ethan realized that the lessons he had learned from Aeon were not just about surviving the land. They were about discovering a connection that could change the course of his life forever. The early morning air was cool and fresh. As Ethan and Aeon rode through a narrow canyon, the sun had just begun to rise, painting the cliffs with shades of gold and red. Birds called softly in the distance, and the wind whispered through the sparse trees. Ethan's horse moved carefully over the rocky terrain, and he felt a sense of quiet confidence. After days of learning from Aeon, he was beginning to understand the rhythm of the land, and he trusted her guidance completely. Aeon rode beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon with alert precision, every movement purposeful and sure. The journey had been peaceful so far, but the plains were unpredictable. Aeon had warned him many times to always remain cautious. "Danger comes where you least expect it," she had said, her voice calm but firm. Ethan had nodded, fully understanding her words now. He had learned to read the signs, the disturbed soil, broken branches, and distant tracks of animals. Every detail mattered, and ignoring even the smallest clue could have serious consequences. As they rounded a bend in the canyon, Ethan noticed a group of figures on horseback in the distance. They were moving quickly, their shadows stretching long in the morning light. Ethan squinted, trying to make sense of the riders. Something about them felt wrong. Aeon's posture stiffened, and she motioned for Ethan to stay low in the saddle. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the riders carefully. "Horse thieves," she whispered in a low voice, her tone serious. "They take what is not theirs, be ready." Ethan's heart quickened. He had heard stories of horse thieves in the region, bands of men who roamed the plains, taking horses and supplies from unsuspecting travelers. He had always managed to avoid them, but now the danger was real and close. He glanced at Aeon, seeing the calm determination in her eyes. She was not afraid, though she understood the risk. Ethan drew strength from her courage, realizing that their survival depended not only on skill but on trust and cooperation. Aeon quickly surveyed the canyon, noting possible escape routes and hiding spots. She whispered instructions to Ethan, guiding him to a narrow path that would allow them to avoid the main trail. Together, they moved quietly, keeping the horses calm and steady. Every step required focus, every sound mattered. Ethan marveled at Aeon's skill. She seemed to anticipate the thieves' actions before they happened, predicting their movements with a precision born from years of experience in the wild. Despite their careful approach, the horse thieves had spotted them. One rider broke away from the group, heading directly toward Ethan and Aeon. The man shouted, demanding they stop, his voice harsh and commanding. Ethan felt a surge of fear but steadied himself. Aeon's hand brushed his arm briefly, a silent reassurance. She had a plan, and he trusted her completely. He tightened his grip on the reins, ready to follow her lead. Aeon guided them to a small outcropping of rocks that offered partial cover. Ethan crouched behind the stones, his horse trembling slightly under him. He watched as Aeon moved with incredible speed and precision, placing traps and positioning themselves strategically. She whispered instructions, pointing to the terrain and demonstrating how to use it to their advantage. Ethan followed her directions, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. The adrenaline coursed through his veins, heightening his senses. Every sound, the wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoofbeats, was amplified, demanding his full attention. The thief approached, unaware of the clever trap Aeon had set. Suddenly, a rope snapped taut, catching the horse and causing it to stumble. The man swore loudly, struggling to regain control. Aeon seized the moment, signaling Ethan to move forward. They pushed their horses carefully along the narrow path, staying just out of reach of the thieves. Ethan realized how much he had learned from Aeon in just a few days. Her knowledge, courage, and quick thinking had prepared him for moments like this, and he felt a deep respect for her skill. As they continued, another rider joined the first, attempting to cut them off. Aeon adjusted their path, leading them to a natural bend in the canyon where the rocks offered better protection. Ethan followed closely, trusting her instincts. The thieves were frustrated, unable to anticipate her strategy. It became clear that Aeon's plan was working. They were not only avoiding capture but also subtly turning the situation in their favor. The tension was high, but Ethan felt a strange exhilaration. He had faced danger before on the ranch, but nothing like this. The stakes were higher, and every decision mattered. He noticed how calm Aeon remained, her eyes scanning constantly, her mind always ahead. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely despite it. Her bravery inspired him, giving him confidence he had never known before. Finally, the thieves gave up, realizing they could not catch them. They shouted curses and rode off toward the distant plains, their figures shrinking into the horizon. Ethan exhaled, feeling a wave of relief and gratitude. He looked at Aeon, seeing the faintest smile on her face. She had done it. They had survived together. The experience had been dangerous, yes, but it had also strengthened the bond between them. They had relied on each other's skills, trust, and courage to face the threat. After the danger passed, Ethan and Aeon guided their horses to a small clearing. They dismounted, stretching their legs and checking the animals for injuries. Ethan noticed how carefully Aeon inspected each horse, ensuring they were unharmed. He was impressed by her attention to detail and her dedication. "You saved us," he said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. Aeon shrugged slightly, her expression modest. "We saved each other," she replied. The event left a lasting impression on Ethan. He had always thought of the plains as beautiful but harsh, unforgiving yet manageable through hard work and determination. Now he understood a deeper truth. The land demanded respect, awareness, and unity. Danger could come at any moment, and survival depended not only on skill but on trust and cooperation. Aeon had taught him this lesson more vividly than any book or mentor ever could. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Ethan reflected on the day's events. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of connection and understanding. He realized that his feelings for Aeon had grown stronger, not just admiration for her skill, but something deeper, more personal. He respected her strength, intelligence, and courage, and he felt drawn to her in ways he could not fully explain. Aeon, too, seemed aware of the unspoken bond between them. She moved closer, offering guidance and support, her presence a comforting reassurance after the day's tension. Over the next few days, Ethan and Aeon continued their journey through the plains. They shared stories of their lives, teaching each other not only about survival but also about trust, courage, and resilience. Ethan told Aeon about his ranching life, the long days, the challenges, and the simple joys. She shared stories of her people, the traditions, the respect for the land, and the skills passed down through generations. Each story, each lesson, brought them closer, creating a bond built on respect, understanding, and growing admiration. One afternoon, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Ethan realized something important. The connection he felt with Aeon was no longer just about survival or learning. It was about trust, companionship, and something deeper that he could not yet name. He felt a quiet joy in her presence, a sense of peace and belonging that he had never experienced before. Aeon, too, seemed to recognize the change. She watched him with thoughtful eyes, a faint smile playing on her lips. There was an unspoken acknowledgement between them, a realization that their bond had grown stronger, and that together, They could face the challenges of the plains and whatever dangers might come their way. By the end of this part of their journey, Ethan and Aeon had faced danger, survived it together, and emerged with a bond that was unbreakable. They had relied on each other's skills, courage, and trust, creating a partnership that went beyond words. The plains were still wild and unpredictable, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that made all the difference. The events of these days had changed Ethan in profound ways. He had learned not only about the land and survival, but about courage, trust, and the strength of human connection. And he realized that the bond he shared with Aeon might be the most important discovery of all, a quiet, unspoken understanding that could shape the course of their lives forever. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting long shadows across the golden grass. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and earth. Ethan McCall sat on his horse, watching the horizon, feeling a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. His journey with Aeon had taught him more than he could have imagined, about the land, survival, courage, and trust. But now, with the trail leading back toward his ranch, he faced a new challenge, leaving the woman who had become so important to him. Aeon was nearby, preparing their small camp for the day. She moved with her usual calm confidence, gathering supplies and checking the horses. Ethan watched her, noticing the grace in her movements, the quiet strength that had impressed him from the very beginning. He realized that these past weeks had changed him. Not only had he learned new skills, but he had discovered feelings he had never expected. Respect had grown into admiration, admiration into affection, and now, quietly but undeniably, into love. He approached her, his horse moving slowly to match her pace. "Aeon," he began, his voice hesitant, I don't want to leave this place, and I don't want to leave you." Aeon looked up, meeting his gaze. Her dark eyes reflected the same mixture of emotions he felt, uncertainty, hope, and a deep connection that neither had spoken of aloud. She paused, taking a moment before responding, as if weighing her words carefully. Finally, she spoke softly. You will go back to your ranch, I know, but I want to see it. I want to know your world as you know mine." Ethan felt a wave of relief and joy. Her words were simple, yet they carried more meaning than any elaborate declaration could. He realized that this was more than an invitation. It was a choice, a willingness to bridge the gap between two very different worlds. "Then, will you come with me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though his heart raced. Aeon nodded, a small, genuine smile breaking across her face. It was a moment of quiet understanding, the beginning of a new chapter in both of their lives. They spent the rest of the morning preparing for the journey to Ethan's ranch. The horses were fed and rested, supplies packed carefully. Ethan checked the saddle and reins one last time, feeling confident and secure. Aeon, too, moved with precision, making sure everything was ready. There was an unspoken rhythm to their work, a harmony born from days of shared effort and trust. As they mounted their horses, the plain stretched endlessly before them, a vast landscape full of promise and possibility. The ride was peaceful at first. Ethan guided his horse along familiar trails, pointing out landmarks and explaining the terrain. Aeon listened intently, her eyes bright with curiosity. She asked questions about his life on the ranch, about the cattle, the chores, and the routines that defined his days. Ethan answered patiently, realizing that sharing his world with her was not only a joy but a privilege. He felt a growing sense of pride, knowing that she was interested, that she cared enough to learn and understand. As they traveled, they encountered the challenges of the plains, rocky paths, narrow trails, and the occasional wild animal. But together, they faced each obstacle with skill and cooperation. Ethan guided his horse carefully, while Aeon pointed out dangers and offered advice. Their partnership was seamless, the trust between them evident in every decision. Ethan realized that this journey was more than a physical ride. It was a test of their bond, a demonstration of how well they worked together and how deeply they trusted one another. One afternoon, they stopped by a small stream to rest and refresh the horses. Aeon knelt beside the water, washing her hands and filling a small container. Ethan watched her, feeling a quiet admiration. She had taught him so much, not just about survival but about patience, observation, and respect. He felt a deep gratitude, knowing that he could never have learned these lessons alone. As he filled his own water container, he glanced at her and smiled. "I never imagined I would meet someone like you," he said quietly. "You've changed how I see everything, this land, the animals, even myself." Aeon looked up, her eyes softening. "And you've shown me a life I never thought I would know, strength, patience, and kindness." "I see it in you, Ethan." The conversation hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Neither spoke for a long moment, yet the silence was comfortable, filled with understanding and shared experience. Ethan felt a surge of courage. He reached out, gently taking her hand. She did not pull away. Instead, she let him hold it, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. In that quiet moment, the plains seemed to stretch infinitely around them, and the vastness of the land mirrored the possibilities of their future together. As they continued toward the ranch, the landscape gradually changed. The wild, untamed plains gave way to rolling fields, fences, and the distant outlines of barns and buildings. Ethan's heart swelled with anticipation and pride. He had worked hard to build this life, and now he was sharing it with someone who had become essential to his happiness. Aeon, too, seemed fascinated by the sights, the careful arrangement of fences, the organized barns, and the herds of cattle grazing peacefully. She asked questions, and Ethan explained patiently, realizing how much he enjoyed showing her his world. When they finally reached the ranch, Ethan's family and neighbors were surprised and curious. Few had ever met someone like Aeon, and they watched with a mix of wonder and caution as she stepped down from her horse. Ethan introduced her carefully, explaining her skills, her wisdom, and the help she had given him on the plains. His family listened, impressed by her knowledge and courage. Aeon spoke with quiet confidence, sharing a little of her story, and the more they learned about her, the more they admired her. Over the next few days, Aeon adjusted to life on the ranch. She learned the routines, helped with small tasks, and continued to teach Ethan skills he had gained from her people. Together, they worked seamlessly, guiding the cattle, repairing fences, and managing the chores. Ethan found joy in her presence, not only because of her skill but because of the calm, steady companionship she provided. Aeon, too, seemed to enjoy the work, finding satisfaction in contributing and learning, in being part of a new world without losing her own identity. As the weeks passed, Ethan and Aeon grew closer. Their bond, forged on the plains and strengthened through shared challenges, deepened into love. It was quiet at first, subtle, a glance, a touch, a shared smile, but unmistakable. They learned to understand each other without words, anticipating each other's needs and supporting one another through the routines of ranch life. The respect and trust that had defined their relationship now blossomed into affection, care, and a deep emotional connection. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, Ethan and Aeon sat together on a small rise overlooking the ranch. The sky was painted with shades of pink, orange, and purple, reflecting on the quiet fields below. Ethan took her hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength of her grip. "I never thought I would find someone like you," he said softly. "Not here, not in this life, and yet here you are. I don't want to imagine my life without you." Aeon's eyes glistened in the fading light. "And I don't want to leave your world either. I have found strength, friendship, and something more, something I cannot ignore." The words, simple yet heartfelt, bridged the gap between their worlds. They had come from different places, different lives, and different cultures, but the bond they shared was undeniable. It was built on trust, respect, courage, and shared experience, a bond that neither distance nor difference could break. Ethan leaned closer, and Aeon met him halfway, their foreheads touching in a quiet gesture of love and understanding. The plains stretched endlessly behind them, vast and wild, yet in that moment the world seemed contained, safe, and filled with possibility. In the days that followed, Ethan and Aeon continued their life together, balancing work, learning, and growing love. They faced challenges, of course. The ranch required constant care, the land was unpredictable, and neighbors were sometimes skeptical, but together they found solutions. Their partnership became a model of cooperation, patience, and mutual respect. The love that had begun quietly on the plains now became the foundation of their shared life, strong and resilient. Ethan realized that the broken saddle that had brought them together was more than just a tool. It had been the start of a journey that changed his life completely. It had led him to Aeon, taught him lessons he could never have learned alone, and introduced him to a world filled with courage, wisdom, and love. Aeon, too, understood that their meeting had been a turning point. The plains had tested them, challenged them, and shaped them, and now they faced the future together, stronger and united. As the sun set on another day, Ethan and Aeon sat together, hands intertwined, hearts connected, and eyes full of hope. The ranch stretched behind them, the plains beyond it, and the world ahead was vast and full of promise. They had found something rare and precious: trust, respect, and a love that crossed boundaries and bridged worlds. And in that quiet, golden light, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, side by side, hearts united, ready for whatever the future might bring.